Okay, so thanks for joining everyone. I'm feeling quite tired today, so I will try not to put you to sleep with my talk, but I apologize if you start to get bored. I'll try not to make it boring though. Okay, so just as an introduction, um, I want to kind of repeat something that I said last time, which was that I'm trying to do this talk outside the context of Gonzalez. So, I don't care if something seems to conflict with the way that we're currently doing things. I'm just presenting the way the material is as I found it. Um, However, when something that we are doing seems to intersect with some of the information that I found online, um, I might point some of that out. But yeah, otherwise, I'm not going to let our methodologies influence the way that I present this stuff. But it also does depend on some of the information that we talked about in the previous session with regards to TDD. Primarily the whole red-green refactor cycle and just iterating through that quickly with a partner. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about some of the terminology with regards to pair programming, and really this is kind of this is the core of it. Like, I kind of feel like there's three main things to pair programming, and the terminology here is the first one. And it's like once you get these things, then the rest kind of just falls from that. So first of all, you know about the driver. Um, there's two roles in pair programming. There's the driver and the navigator. Um, the driver role is responsible for coding and essentially just focusing on writing clean code that compiles and works and does the job for whatever task you're trying to achieve. It's just thinking about the task that's currently in front of you. Okay? Um, and you can kind of think of it with regards to the TDD state machine. You can think about it as the driver is focused on getting you from the current state that you're in to the next state. So, you're most likely you're going to be in a red state, and the driver's focused on getting you to the green state, right? The navigator, on the other hand, is the one that's thinking. He or she is thinking about the bigger picture. The bigger picture could be just the iterative next step, which might be the next test that you're going to work on, um, the the bigger picture in terms of design, with regards to whatever it is that the driver is coding. How that overall design fits, how that design of the specific component you're working on fits into the rest of the application or other things that you've worked on. And this is what the navigator's role is. Yeah, and I don't know if I already mentioned it, but the navigator can also be thinking about, with regards to TDD, what test to add next, or what test to work on next. What test will put you back into that red state. So that's kind of the two roles that we're going to be talking about through the rest of the presentation. Driver navigator, it's pretty much the core of pair programming. And we'll of course return to some of this a bit later. Now, in terms of why do we pair, let's just cover some of the benefits. Everyone benefits from this in terms of individual programmers. The team benefits, the system itself benefits, even management benefits from pair programming. And I'll cover some of the reasons, but mostly I want to talk about how the programmer benefits from this. So and that would obviously be each one of us as an individual. So one way is lower frustration. So in other words, you're sitting there with your partner, and say you get stuck on something, you're going to quickly get unstuck because you have two people thinking about whatever problem it is that you're working on, and one person may have an idea if the other person doesn't. So you spend more time actually coding and actually having fun and doing what you want to do. Next, fewer distractions, sort of. So it's not that there are less distractions, it's that you're able to stay focused despite the distractions more easily. So when you're working with someone and communicating with them, you know, the things going on around you are less likely to distract you than if you were working alone. And also, you know, when there's um, other, when you're working with someone, other people are going to be less likely to interrupt you than if you were working alone. So that's what I mean by sort of. Okay, so the next is positive peer pressure. So this is talking about basically enforcing team best practices, making sure that you are doing test-driven development, making sure that you're, you know, following whatever guidelines the team is supposed to follow. You know, you have that sort of positive reinforcement to make sure that you're doing what you should be doing. The next is shared code, and what this is referring to is basically code ownership. And when, if imagine a case where nobody thinks that they own a certain piece of code. So say it's some legacy piece of code that, you know, nobody really touches very often. It's, if you're working alone, you're more at risk that people are going to be going through there and kind of hacking that code in sort of dangerous ways. They think, oh, you know, I don't own that code. I'm just going to make whatever it is work that I'm, you know, trying to fix, and you know, I don't care about this hack. But when you're working with someone, you're demonstrating your commitment to quality on the code that you're working on, and so you have this sort of collective ownership, and you're demonstrating that to your partner. And it's subtle, and maybe you don't agree, but I kind of think this is an interesting point that was made in some of the articles that I found. Another interesting benefit is that it's easier to change teams. So when you're doing pair programming, the knowledge is kind of shared throughout the team of, you know, the code base. So there isn't just, you know, one person that knows about this section of code and another person that knows about this section of code. So therefore, if someone wants to leave, it's not such a it doesn't hurt the team so badly because everyone is kind of aware of, you know, what's going on. So when you have that that balance of knowledge, then it makes it much easier if you want to go move to another team within the company, because then you can ask your manager and be like, hey, look, you know, I'd like to go work on this other team, and you're doing pair programming, so everybody knows what's going on. No big deal, you know, it's not a problem. So I think that's a real benefit. And obviously, you learn more. So, you know, every time I've paired with each and every one of you guys, I've always learned something from each of you, because I think everybody has something to contribute. Everybody has some sort of some bit of knowledge that you haven't heard about before, and you can learn a lot from pairing this way. Real quickly, I'll mention some of the other benefits for other groups like management. Or maybe I'll save that for last in case Richard comes in. But as far as the team and the system goes, you end up with cleaner code, which if you don't have that, obviously it hurts future productivity. You expand the sphere of knowledge, which we've kind of already talked about, and you're putting in a better infrastructure for the system. Okay, so with management, it's your hiring criteria is smaller because you're not worried so much about having the exact knowledge that you need for the code base that you're working on, because when you're pair programming, if your partner knows it, they can kind of catch you up to speed with whatever it is that you don't know. And also, when you do pair programming, you have a more predictable rate of development because each pair has approximately the same knowledge and can move through tasks approximately at equal speeds. So therefore, predictable rate of development means, you know, better estimates and so on. Okay, so let's move on. I don't want to bore you guys too much with that. Let's talk about when and how do we pair. In terms of when do we pair, the guideline to follow is you pair on anything that you need to maintain. So obviously this is any production code. This will be any tests, as well as any build scripts, anything like that. So anything that needs to be maintained. This is a pretty easy rule of thumb to remember. Now, in terms of how do you pair, the most important concept that I read in everything, in all the different articles that I came across, was communication. That when you're working with your partner, you need to be communicating in all levels, and that sometimes happens vocally. Talking about what it is that you're doing at this moment, what it is that you plan to do next. Maybe you're just thinking out loud, about whatever, I don't know, questions you have, or, thoughts you have for how to approach the problem, and so on. Sometimes it's also in code. You communicate in code, right? With test-driven development, you're communicating through the tests that you're writing, and then, you fix those tests, and then you write another test, and you're going back and forth very quickly using these tests. And obviously, one thing to remember is that if you find yourself getting stuck, communication starts to struggle, if you're getting frustrated or you're not sure what to do, take smaller steps with the test that you're writing, and make the teeth on the ratchet a bit smaller, to refer to the pulling the bucket up a well analogy that we had last week. Anyways, in terms of what to discuss, go over any assumptions that you're making, talk about the general direction that you're heading, if this is like, even in terms of the immediate thing that you're going to work on, or just the bigger picture that you have in mind of why you want to do something a certain way. It's important to keep each other informed of what your thoughts are. And obviously, we've talked about next steps, your thoughts, and ask any questions to your partner. It's important to not be afraid to ask questions if you aren't understanding, or you need clarification, or anything along those lines. I think we have to sort of trust each other, that that it's okay to ask questions. And that's what this is all about, really, is communication. If you can't trust someone enough to be comfortable asking them a question when you don't understand, then you don't have that communication that you need. But let's talk about some more specifics in terms of how do we pair program. And we have a nice example of a driver and a navigator here. So what we're doing is switching pairs frequently, and we want to do that at least once a day. Now, I saw different suggestions for how often to switch, but once a day was the minimum. There were some that suggested switching, every 60 minutes and every 30 minutes for problems that were particularly difficult.
Is that assuming that you've got one person that's constant?
This is, it's not constant, but it's always keeping one person that knows the context of what you're working on, and that can inform the person that's coming in.
So it's flexible.
So it's flexible, but yeah, I mean, it's not explicitly saying that one person is constant, but it is saying that whoever leaves, the remaining person has to know, what's going on, so that they can bring the incoming person up to speed. So the 60 minutes and 30 minutes were kind of extreme, right? But that's sort of the maximum, I would say. The The ideal is more like every 2 to 4 hours.
Switching partners or switching rule?
This is switching pairs,
So partner,
switching partners,
every 2 hours. Okay.
right? Every 2 to 4 hours. But the minimum would be, every once a day. So, to sort of tie it in with Gonzalez and what we're doing here, I think that the way that we're doing it is fine.
But is that in any way related to the size of the group?
No.
It doesn't say like.
Everything is not supposed to be big anyway.
Yeah, but
That's why they say like the Scrum Master
It's
is around
just-
8.
You want to eventually pair with everyone, but it doesn't really matter how big the group is. You just
the bigger the group, the more often you switch, and your context switch is going to have more tasks.
I mean,
Switch between
this
those
is-
contexts even more.
so one of the benefits of switching is to expand the sphere of knowledge, as I kind of mentioned earlier. So obviously, if your group is very small, if you switch across the same set of partners 20 times, you're not going to expand the knowledge that much. Whereas if you have a bigger group, then you're going to really expand the knowledge. So
Yeah, in a small group, you switch back and forth between the same task, right?
Yeah.
Whereas inside with our size, you expect to never go back to the task you switched off.
Yeah.
Probably.
generally, yeah. So yeah, but in general, it isn't something that you need to worry about too much, with regards to the size of the group. And yeah, as we said, have one person stay on the task to help bring the new person up to speed. You also switch when you're feeling stuck. So if you're working on a task and you're like, man, I just have no idea what to do, get someone else in there and get a fresh perspective on the task that you're working on. Obviously, when you finish a task, that's a great time to switch. Obvious breakpoints, when the task is complete or when you finish a test or whatever, it's a good time to switch. And when I say when you finish a test, I don't mean after every test that you finish, because otherwise you're going to be switching every like 5 to 15 minutes. I mean, like you've done, say, 10 tests with your current partner over the last 2 hours. Okay, now we just finished the test. It's a good time to switch. That's what I meant. When you need a fresh perspective, as we've mentioned, now they also talk about this ping pong pairing, and this is just talking about the way that you switch roles, the way that you switch between who's going to be a navigator and who's going to be a driver. So the way ping pong pairing works is one person writes the code that makes a test pass, and then writes the next test, and then you switch roles, and that person makes the test pass and then writes the next test. Then you switch roles again, and that person makes the test pass and then writes the next test. So you kind of give your partner the test that he or she needs to make pass, and then you switch and then let them do the coding and so on. That's ping pong pairing, and this is a great way to communicate with your partner as well. So frequent role switching, we've already talked about this. They suggest every 30 minutes at least to switch roles. So very frequently switching roles between driver and navigator. And pairing when tired. So this is something that we'll talk again about a bit later in the presentation, but it has to do with I think it's called energized development, energized work. So when you get tired, end pairing at that time. It doesn't matter if you're working with someone, it isn't going to magically make you produce a good code if you're not thinking properly.
And pair like go home.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. What do you do?
Well, it means you can work on something else. go through your emails, you know, respond to emails. In other words, don't contribute to things that need to be maintained because you're most likely doing more harm than good, basically.
Yeah.
So, you know, go through your emails or, you know, respond to support questions,
Copy
these
paste.
kinds of things.
Fix
Fix the build, yeah. This kind of stuff.
Sugar cafe.
Yeah.
Some paracetamol.
So it means revert to those tasks that cover things that do not require maintenance. And there are some suggestions of the types of things that you can work on, you know, if you're not pairing. So, yeah. Okay, so one thing that is somewhat related to the Gonzalez team that I wanted to really highlight because I think that the past few days, this is something that we've been talking about. It's just a quote that I wanted to share. And this is with regards to assigning pairs or not and the way that you know, form your pairs. So it says, when you start working on a task, ask another programmer to work with you. If another programmer asks for help, make yourself available. Never assign partners. Partners are fluid, forming naturally and shifting throughout the day. Over time, pair with everyone on the team. This will help improve team cohesion and it will spread design skills and knowledge throughout the team. So I think, you know, that's a great thing to highlight. And, you know, we kind of tried it today and it seemed to be pretty effective. I've done it, you know, the past few days and I've liked it. The nice thing that I like about it is that I have I have a bit more say as far as what it is that I'm going to work on. And you know, I don't know, it's kind of fun to be like, you know, oh yeah, I think it would be great if I worked on this task. And, you know, I think a good partner for this would be Max, you know. And then we start working on this together and it's like we form a two-man team briefly, you know, and we're going to really attack this thing. I don't know. Everyone will feel differently about it, obviously, but you will feel better, I think, about the pairing situation that you get yourself into. And if nothing else, if you really don't care, then it won't matter much. You'll just end up in whatever pair is the last one available, and nothing will be much different for you, anyways. Okay, so just a few more tips. I wanted to comment on one of the three things that was repeated in all of the resources that I found talking about pair programming. That's suggested it was like one of the core, one of the critical components of pair programming, and that was having a comfortable working space. Even to the point where they say that if you don't have a proper workspace in which to work, you shouldn't be doing pair programming. So I think that in this way, Sky developers are actually very, very lucky because in most cases they just say, you know, have a big wide desk and a nice big screen. You know, they don't even mention having 2 screens or 2 keyboards, 2 mice, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think we're actually very lucky there.
This wasn't the case a few months ago.
Mm.
We were trying to some one desk, 2 people are sitting, another 2 people are there.
Yeah, yeah. So we're lucky that we didn't see that then.
NSC 2 it was like that.
I see.
This many people were sitting on 6 desks.
Mm.
I've seen worse concerns.
NSC 2 as well, right?
Okay, so anyways, I just wanted to mention that because, like I said, it was one of the most critical things with regards to pair programming. Another is that the drivers should not be silent. You know, the driver should always be communicating. If he has some idea of what he wants to write in terms of code, he should be explaining what he's thinking, what he or she is thinking. You know, say what your next steps are, what you're planning to do, and why, so that your navigator knows and can be thinking about, you know, the bigger picture. Also, navigators are not proofreaders. So allow the driver to make a typo, allow the driver to, spell things incorrectly, or I don't know, forget the semicolon and whatnot. They'll remember it eventually, and your job is as a navigator is to be thinking about more important things than that stuff. Because nobody's perfect. Nobody's going to type something and have it be perfect every time, and it's going to be annoying if your navigator's like, oh, you forgot a comma.
And you always know, right? You always type in, you know you've made a mistake, but you're carrying on typing and you're going to fix it. And
Yeah.
someone says, oh, well, you've made a mistake. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Exactly, and another problem.
We all know that everybody here knows how to write Java, so it's not like you need to coach them on like really basic things, right?
Exactly. And another problem with it is that it kind of, if you do that, it interrupts the driver's train of thought, right? He might have a certain vision of where he's going with the code that he's about to write. And if you, interrupt them, it sort of takes them out of that. And then they're like, oh, what was I doing again? Anyways, it's not a big deal, but I think it's important to mention. Drivers have the wheel. New navigators can feel compelled to sort of take the keyboard away from the driver, but instead, if you feel that, you should ask for the keyboard, and even just ask to switch roles for a time. And yeah, so that's pretty much it that I had for the tips. Any questions so far? We'll have questions at the end for you guys, but if you do have any, feel free to interrupt, as you've already been doing, I guess. So anyways, let's talk a bit about when don't we pair, because I think that from what I've read, pairing is something that should happen more naturally and isn't something that is so dogmatic. You assign the pairs naturally, and if something doesn't make sense to be paired on, then you shouldn't be pairing. And so some examples are, one thing is this concept of privacy and creativity. So Kent Beck talks a bit about this in the 2 pages that he covers pair programming in the Extreme Programming book. But he says, everyone needs companionship and privacy. So if there is some idea that you want to hash out, then you can do that. You can go and work on this privately by yourself. Go do it. But then once you have kind of explored the idea that you have, bring that back to the pair and re-implement it with the pair. You'll do it quickly. If you've already done it once, you'll do it quickly with the pair, and the results would be more widely understood, and then therefore benefiting the project as a whole. And so you would, it's not that you're not going to have the ability to be creative because you're always working with somebody else. Because sometimes you just need that time to think, Anyways, another example, spikes. And yes, they talked about spikes. So I finally read it in a book. Spikes. It wasn't a made-up sky thing. Yeah, so this is one area where you don't need to pair. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't pair. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm saying that it's not, this isn't anything that needs to be maintained. This is just, something that you're investigating, and, you can feel free to do that on your own. Also, when questions arise, and I mean, I've done this with multiple partners before, where, it's like, okay, I need to investigate, this error that we're seeing in ActiveMQ or whatever, So I'm gonna just look into that on my laptop, Google this for a while, and then I can report my findings with my partner. and they'll do the same. And so it's really I think we're already doing this, but I think it's worth mentioning. And also support. This wasn't anything that was mentioned in the things that I read.
You made it up.
So I don't want to lie to you guys, but this was, I felt, a good candidate for something that you don't need to pair on. And again, we're already doing this in some cases, so this is maybe not anything new to anyone. And lastly, energized work. Stop when you're tired. I'm not sure what more to say about this, but aside from one thing that Ken Beck talks about, which is having a code time, what he's trying to address is the scenario where someone feels compelled to just stay late all the time, or work longer hours than they should, or continue pairing even once they're tired. By introducing code time, you say that for this block of 2 or 3 hours, we're going to switch off our phones, turn off email notifications, and just code for 3 hours, right? And the idea is that by injecting this sort of productive period in your day, you're hopefully going to be more productive and therefore feel less compelled to stay longer at the end of the day. And when you're tired, you're less productive, you're probably introducing more problems than you're solving, so you should stop anyways. And hopefully if you have this code time, then you're being very effective with that 3 hours of time that you're programming. Does that make sense? Okay, sorry if this is boring, but this is the material. Okay, so that's it basically. Any questions?